Hey, hello, and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Tobias, and this is the first episode for my YouTube channel. I've been procrastinating this forever. A couple of years ago, I said I'm going to start a podcast just talking about music because I love talking about music. And then it came to YouTube, and I was like, yeah, perhaps YouTube is a good format. And then it took a couple of years more. Oh, I procrastinated so much. But here I am. I decided just sit down and do this thing and talk about music. If anyone's listening or watching this, I am so grateful. Today, we're going to talk about how I came into popular music or how I started listening to music. And if you haven't already heard it, from my twang, from my accent, I am from Sweden. But I've been living in the UK now for the last 8 years or so. My journey into music started in the mid to late 70s. I was heavily into musicals when I was a small boy. That was my real connection with music. At first time I saw a musical, I was blown away with all the extravaganza, of course, the colors and the songs. So that was all I knew about music, really. My parents didn't have much of a music collection. I remember them having a couple of ABBA records. I think that was the closest thing to pop, rock, popular music overall that they had. Because they were big fans of something that we called dansband in Sweden, and I don't know really how to explain dansband. It's just something that a lot of, especially in my parents' generation, and I still think today a lot of younger people hooked onto this because it's big in Sweden, dansband, but it's usually live bands that you go out listening to during Saturdays usually, and you dance the night away to this catchy dance band music. But that was basically it when I grew up. Those were the records that we were listening to, or at least my parents, and I was hooked on musicals. But back then I didn't buy my own records, so I just had to wait until the next weekend came along, and usually they showed a musical on the telly back then, so I could watch that and be amazed. But then something happened. In the late 70s, I think it was 1979, late 1979, my father worked for a Swedish telecom company and was offered to do some work in Saudi Arabia, of all places in the world. So it was decided the whole family was going to move with him to Saudi Arabia, just outside Riyadh, the capital of Saudi. And we were fortunate enough, me and my sister, to go to a Swedish school where we lived. And this was my introduction to popular music. Even on my first day, this happened, and I still remember it so clearly. I was greeted by some of my fellow classmates, and they said to me, "What music do you like?" And it wasn't like a broad question, like, "What music do you like? What is it?" No, it was formulated like this: "What music do you like? Is it the Beatles or Kiss?" That was it. You had nothing else to choose from. Apparently, there were two camps, one Beatles camp and one Kiss camp. And the cooler kids were in the Kiss camp, of course. And me, with my music background, or musical background, that is, I only knew of musicals. I believe it or not, I never heard of the Beatles. I never heard of Kiss. I didn't know what it was. So I can't remember what I said, but I'd probably say, I don't know. Give me a day or two to think about it. So I remember coming home to my parents, probably the same day in the evening, and I said to them, I told them about this, and my father said, "Well, we're going into town," if it was the day after or a couple of days after, "and we're going to pick up some music then." And if you picked up music in Saudi Arabia at that point, it was just cassettes. It was everything that you could buy when it came to music was cassettes. They probably had some 8-tracks back then as well, but I wasn't aware of what 8-tracks was. But anywho, we got some cassettes. He picked up some Kiss cassettes for me, some albums, and a couple of Beatles as well. I remember clearly it was Beatles, the Red album and the Blue album, and that could have been Help as well, but the Blue and the Red one I remember clearly, and the Red one is of course their early years, if I don't mistaken, and the Blue one is their later years. And I remember the Red one, I listened so much to it, I fell in love with that music, great pop tunes, and my mind was blown when it comes to the Beatles. How about Kiss then? I can't even remember having a musical impression of Kiss at all, because one of the first cassettes that I picked up was Kiss Alive 2. And I remember just looking at this cover, and there was a picture of Gene Simmons, and he was drooling blood, and I thought that was nightmare fuel for me. I thought he looked evil. You're evil. And of course he was going to be, because he is the demon, right, in the group. But I had no clue. I was like, why is he bleeding? Is something happened to him? So I can't remember that. I've probably buried it somewhere in a dark corner somewhere. And the other albums that I also got, and I don't think it was all in one go, because we picked up cassettes on different occasions. But I remember having all the solo albums as well from the Kiss members. And don't ask me today what I thought about them, because I can't remember. It was I was in the Beatles camp now. I wasn't in a Kiss camp. I was never going to fit in with the cool kids and the Kiss and Gene Simmons and all that. So yeah, I don't. Nowadays, I of course heard all of these records because I was curious further down the road in the coming years. So I did listen to a couple of them, and I did enjoy some of them. I can't say which one I thought was best, but I did get hooked on New York Groove with Ace Frehley, as so many did. It was one of the better ones. And yeah, that was my strange gateway, so to speak, into popular music, joining the Beatles gang. Yeah. So today, and what do I have when it comes to Beatles and Kiss? What is my relation to them today? Well, believe it or not, I only own 2 records by the Beatles today. I think early in 90... I can't say the specific year. Early in the 90s somewhere. I bought Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band by the Beatles. You have to have that one, right? Some really good tracks. And the only one I got on vinyl is this one. It is, of course, the White Album, or just the Beatles, as it says here. Really good record. Got some odd tracks on it, but overall this is my favorite of them. I listened to all the other albums as well on either streaming services, or I had friends who had those records, so I was listening. I had been listening to a lot of Beatles, but for some reason it never really, I wouldn't say it catched on to me, because I'd still love a lot of Beatles songs, but it was never really part of my collection, so to speak. Well, it is a part of it, but it's just this one and a poor CD somewhere over there. So that is my Beatles legacy. When it comes to the solo efforts from the Beatles, I got a lot of Paul McCartney, but I'm going to talk about Paul McCartney in a future episode, because I do have a lot of his work, and I do appreciate that a lot more than the Beatles, believe it or not, and it's probably sacrilegious in some circles. But anyhow, Kiss. One other album I remember having on cassette was Kiss Destroyer, of course, classic album today. So later, earlier this year, I was going to say, I actually picked up this one, which is of course the 45th anniversary on vinyl. Really nice one on colored vinyl. And yeah, it's a good one. There's a lot of good tracks on this. But during the 80s, I didn't listen a lot to hard rock, heavy metal, or rock, if any. of it. And there is explanation to this, and we're going to come to that in a future episode. So this is why I picked these up nowadays, because I have learned to appreciate it, and I'm not scared of this man anymore. I understand the gimmick, but back then you have to realize that this was really heavy music for us, and I think in our minds, listening to Kiss or some of the other groups around that time, perhaps Black Sabbath even, that was heavy, dark music. You couldn't listen to it. I think to us it was the wailing noises from the guitars, the screaming voices from the singers. And it was just a wall of noise to us. We didn't really take the time to sit down and actually listen to it. To us, it was a strange world that we're not going to venture in anytime soon.
Welcome to my home.
I know it's ridiculous because it's really mellow rock and with some really nice tunes as well. And I mean, for God's sake, they released disco tracks as well later on, didn't they? The brilliant I Was Made for Loving You, for example. But yeah, so I did invest in this one earlier this year, and another one I invested in last year was this one, the highly controversial Kiss album, Music from the Elder. This is, by the way, a German copy, as you can see from the Z's here, or the Z's, as some of you say. This one I never had on cassette or in any other form. This is something I was listening to way down the road in my musical journey. I'm just going to talk about it really briefly, why I'm so fond of music from the Elder. And it's because on a really rainy night, rainy and cold night, I was catching a train from one city to another, and the connecting train in one of the stations was cancelled, so they had to get buses for us instead. So we were standing there, a bunch of us, waiting for the buses to arrive, and it was rainy and it was cold, and I had an MP3 player back then, and had 2 albums on it. I can't remember the other one, but I listened a lot to it. And the other one was Kiss, Music from the Elder, because I was a bit curious about it, and I wanted to see what it was all about, because I have heard all these controversies about it from the Kiss fandom, that, oh, no, it's a crap album. And some of them were like, no, it's not that bad. And yeah, it was just one of those things. So I popped it on, and it kept me company throughout that night and my journey home. And yeah, I thought it was really good. There were some really good tunes. I can see they did divert from what they were at that point with this album, both musically and image-wise, of course. But yeah, there's some really good tracks on it. It's really stuck with me. Got some good, fond memories of it. So that's why I invested in this nice one. And if you've probably already seen it if you're a Kiss fan, but I'm going to show the rest of you. Really nice gatefold here with this big table, and you can read all about the Elder here, I assume. Yeah, really nice one. So yeah, that was my continuing journey. And before we wrap it up today, I'm also going to say we only stayed in Saudi Arabia for around 2 years, I think. When we came home, my classmates, they already was hooked on popular music. You know, it's that age around 9, 10 when you started to actually explore music and listening to what's popular on the radio and so forth and so on. And I was a bit behind because I was still stuck in my musicals, and my only really musical knowledge of when it comes to popular music was the Beatles and Kiss, and it wasn't really that popular in the early 80s. So I felt a bit of an outcast. I can't say I was bullied, but I felt a bit of an outcast. So I remember one day coming home to my mother and saying, I told him about this, and I was like, oh, I don't have any popular music. I don't know anything about this. Well, poor me. So my mother, God bless her, took me to the nearest town and one of the malls, and she said, well, pick out a record now. a popular record that we will buy for you, and yeah, you can listen to that. And yeah. So I looked around, and at that point in time, we had a lot of music on cassette, so they had this big rack with cassettes on it. I remember I was going through it, and I was like, oh, there it is. That is the album I'm going to pick up. This is going to give me some cred among my classmates, and they're going to see that I do listen to popular music. So I went up to my mother and said, I want this one. This is the Bill Conti soundtrack for Your Eyes Only. It's a James Bond movie, of course, and this is the CD, as you can see, because I don't have a cassette still. And I remember my mother said to me, she said, are you sure? Is this what you want? A James Bond soundtrack? Yeah. This is going to give me all the right cred. She was a bit like, yeah, okay, if you really want it. And I mean, the closest thing you got to popular music on this one is the opening track, the theme for it, sung by Sheena Easton, which is a lovely track. Don't get me wrong, but this didn't get me into being the popular kid around the pop kids back then. Anyhow, I think later that year or the year after, something brilliant happened on the pop scene. Something that would segue absolutely perfectly from my musical world, my world of musicals, into what was popular music, and I became obsessed. But that is the topic for my next episode. So if you did enjoy this, join me on my next episode. It will come out later this week. And if anyone's been listening or watching this, please comment down below about your experience into the world of music. How did you discover popular music, or how did you get into music? The things you are listening to today. I would love to hear that. I love those kinds of stories about how did you get about listening to music. So that is it from me. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Until next time, adieu.